Welcome back to the Jim Bohannon Show at 1-866-50-JIMBO, 1-866-505-4626. And we are talking now with James Czerniawski, Senior Policy Analyst in Technology and Innovation at Americans for Prosperity. And we're going to be talking a bit about Elon Musk's arrival at Twitter. And James, thanks for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having me.
Now, of course, Musk has purchased the largest single shareholding in Twitter, but that amounts to 9%, which is to say that 91% of the company does not belong to Elon Musk. Is he really that big of a force for change? I mean, I know he wound up being on the board as a largest shareholder, I suppose, would, but 9% versus 91% of other people doesn't sound like he's exactly going to be calling the shots.
I think it's a fair point that you raise. At the end of the day, 9.2% of a company is, like you said, around 90% short. So there's not necessarily a guarantee that he's going to be able to exert unilateral control over how Twitter's operation is going to be run. But on the flip side, that 91% of other shares that are owned by other people are spread across a lot of investors that don't have that level of density in their investment, right? To put it into perspective, he actually owns more shares in Twitter than Jack Dorsey, the founder of Twitter, who has only 2-point-something% of the company. So he's already over 4x larger than the founder. So it's not necessarily, he's not necessarily going to have unilateral control, but he definitely, I think, has an opportunity to express his views and things that he sees to the company, and whether or not they get taken remains to be seen. But I'm certainly optimistic that Elon has a unique opportunity while being on the board to help this company solve a lot of problems that it is facing, not just on the content moderation front, but that company is also, struggling with revenue, not necessarily having great profit margins. So I think he can be a good force for change for the company in general. So I'm excited to see what he does.
Yeah, he is, of course, a self-described free speech absolutist. Does that mean that he will at least attempt to remove Donald Trump's ban from Twitter, as well as, of course, a few thousand other people of lesser status who have also been dropped by Twitter for things that in some cases are, not exactly what I would call a cry for violence in the streets. I mean, some of the pathetic excuses that Twitter has used for dropping people, it just sounds like if you don't march with the new left, that you're pretty much shot out of luck.
Yeah, I think that there's plenty of room to criticize Twitter for the decisions that they made, but that is their right to make it. And when they do make those decisions and they're wrong, in our opinion, it's our responsibility to make sure that we voice ourselves very loud and clear and continue to put pressure on the company to try to adhere to better policies or have better rules in the future to account for that kind of situation. I'm sure Elon Musk has, his plans. I don't know if that includes trying to restore Donald Trump's access to Twitter or any of the other individuals who have been suspended from Twitter over the years. So that's something that we would, again, have to just see how that plays out. And I would just urge caution on this route just because, all right, so he just goes and gets on the board now. It's not like it's going to be one day and all of a sudden, like some of these things happen. It's going to take months, if not, at least a year before we start seeing some, things substantively change if he's able to have the kind of influence that he would like to see happen on the company. So I don't know whether or not the company, because they don't have to necessarily listen to Elon Musk on this per se, but he does have the advantage of, again, having 9.2%, $3 billion basically of capital invested in Twitter, plus the company experienced another 20% bump in its share price after Elon announced that he got the 9.2% stake in Twitter. So there's actually, I think, a significant amount of capital in there that would at least, from my opinion, make it seem like the company would listen to what he has to say and try to figure out how they can improve on the margins to address some of the things that he's raising.
Mm-hmm. What's the view of Americans for Prosperity about all of this?
Well, again, I would just say that when it's all said and done, Twitter is a private company, and they have the right to take the actions that they've been taking. Whether or not that's something that we agree with when those decisions are made, That's totally fair on our side, but it's ultimately the company's responsibility. And, they have every right to do that under the Constitution. They have First Amendment rights. They do not have to go and host your speech. And at the end of the day, for me and for Americans for Prosperity, I think that we believe that it's important that we don't betray those values and that we invest in looking at how we can go and follow the path of Elon Musk, how we can look at alternatives, because Twitter is not the be-all and end-all of the internet, nor is Facebook for that matter. To just put it into perspective for Twitter, right, approximately only 25% of U.S. adults actually are on Twitter actively. And then of that percentage, only 25% of all users on Twitter go and generate basically all the content that are there. So the number of Americans that are actually actively engaging in Twitter is lower than I think people realize. So that's why I think that it's appropriate to just realize that there are alternatives out there, to invest in those, to continue to promote those kinds of things, rather than sit there and try to leverage the heavy hand of government that usually has a one-size-fits-all approach and is managed by a bunch of unelectable, unaccountable bureaucrats that certainly don't necessarily align with our values on things.
I was going to say, what exactly is AmericansForProsperity.org?
Yeah, so Americans for Prosperity is a national grassroots organization that advocates on behalf of millions of Americans across the United States for reducing barriers that help them, prosper in a free society. So we certainly work with lawmakers across all sides of the aisle to go and advocate for those end goals. And we've been really successful in doing that. We're active in over 35 states across the country, and it's an honor to be able to go and represent those people and help advocate for them, whether that's at the state or federal level.
Very good. There are those on the left who poo-poo this whole notion of censorship of conservatives, that it's just hyped up and exaggerated. I've known too many examples to the contrary, but that seems to be an article of faith from many on the left that it isn't really happening.
Well, again, I think that there's plenty of evidence to show instances where it has happened. Whether it's the New York Post story, which I wrote an op-ed about last year, or rather during 2020 now, complaining about Twitter going and taking that down, but that's the government solution that was being proposed at the time was not the answer. But the thing is that you got to remember their content that happens at scale means that in terms of the overarching content that's occurring on there, there's not significant evidence to show that conservatives are necessarily being censored more or less than their liberal counterparts. And it's a little bit harder to see when you're not on the other side. But I've looked at plenty of stuff where Jacobin Magazine, which is by no means a right-leaning organization, has gotten their stuff censored. There was actually an activist who was going up against Nancy Pelosi over the insulin cap bill that they did not too long ago. That got auto-blocked by Twitter. So it's happening to the left, just as much as it happens to the right, but it's not necessarily always a scene when you're not actively looking for those instances on the other side, is what I would say. It's not to go and deny that it doesn't happen. It certainly is there, but I don't think it's not as pronounced as people would like to think sometimes.
1-866-50-JIMBO is our number. 1-866-505-4626 as we talk with James Czerniawski of AmericansForProsperity.org about Elon Musk's arrival at Twitter and just what impact he'll actually have on censorship of conservatives. 1-866-50-JIMBO, 1-866-505-4626, and back with more in just a moment. Welcome back to the Jim Bohannon Show at 1-866-50-JIMBO, 1-866-505-4626 with James Czerniawski, Senior Policy Analyst in Technology and Innovation at AmericansForProsperity.org. Elon Musk, a self-described free speech absolutist, shows up at Twitter with 9.2% of the shares. That's a minority position, but it's the biggest single shareholder position in the company. Let's go to Frank in Kalispell, Montana. Good evening, Frank.
Hi, Jim. It's a sad cry that the new left socialists believe that they have the right to constitutional right to do what they want on Twitter. When we look at back in the history, I mean, we got missing and wounded soldiers behind enemy lines with no electrical hookups, no way of accessing help. Yet some baboon in a zoo could have this little Twitter account. You know, where is the justice?
Well, I guess we are not rigorously enforcing the First Amendment would be my thoughts, and I would turn to our guest, James Czerniawski, about that. The First Amendment is a catch-all collection of various rights about free speech and free press and the right to assemble, and it leads off with the words, "Congress shall pass no law." That is to say, it is a restriction on government, not a restriction on a private organization. Is that the way we are to interpret this, James Czerniawski, that it doesn't really apply to somebody like Twitter?
That is 100% correct. The Constitution is restrictions on what the government can do to infringe upon your rights, right? So like you said, First Amendment, Congress shall make no law. And that is to deal with speech, freedom of the press, assembly, petition your government, etc. But that is against the government's ability to impede you from doing that. And that does not go and extend to a private company like Twitter. They have the right to do what they want on their private property. And I would certainly urge caution before we start undermining private property rights in one area, because then we never know necessarily where people might be willing to go and extend it further. So there are some legitimate risks with doing that. And also the other thing to be aware of, too, is we don't want to necessarily put our finger on the scale of those different aspects of the First Amendment. If we start prioritizing free speech, but then as a result, we start losing on freedom of religion, for example, there's all kinds of unintended consequences of putting too much pressure on one thing versus the other. So we got to just look at it as a wholesome thing and strive for trying to, ensure that the government's not violating those things. When it comes to the government. When it comes to a private company, it's our job as a citizenry, as consumers of that product to, again, make our voices heard to those companies in large fashion. So we've seen that with Elon buying into Twitter. We've seen that a little bit with conservatives protesting Disney. Just the other day, conservatives are figuring out how to leverage their voice to make themselves heard to these companies. And I would urge people to continue to do that, because that's how they know that you're there, that you care, that you have these opinions. And that's so critical and important to our democratic process.
Here's a call from Pat in northern Michigan. Good evening.
Good evening, Jim. Thank you for taking my call. Mm-hmm. As far as Elon goes, I hope he raises a little heaven in that hellhole called Twitter. But your guest was saying that presumably 20-25% of the people are actually on Twitter. I'm wondering how many of those are what they call the paternal bots that turn one man to 1,000, like the old Chinese emperor did when he built all the clay statues. I mean, it just seems like a smoke screen.
I don't know. Are bots part of that 25%? You tell me, James.
It certainly is a fair question. There's not really any stats tracking the bots as effectively that I'd have to go back and look back at it and see what that number looks like. But I believe when they're reporting those stats that they are trying to associate it with live bodies. But like with anything on the internet, we don't necessarily know for certain, because there's actually a very significant degree of anonymity that's afforded to people in the online ecosystem that, I actually think is kind of important. So are there a lot of, bots that are certainly there that might amplify the voices of certain individuals more than others? Absolutely. But I don't know what that exact number looks like. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Fair enough. All right. 1-866-50-JIMBO, 1-866-505-4626 on the Jim Bohannon Show, as we continue to look at just exactly what we're facing here. So when all is said and done, you've got a First Amendment that does not directly address private organizations, and you've got a shareholder with less than 10% of the actual shares of stock in Twitter. It doesn't sound as though if Twitter is ready to dig in its heels, that much is going to change.
It's entirely possible that Elon, tries to push for what he pushes for, and nothing changes at Twitter. But the reality is that from Twitter's perspective, if they do not acquiesce to anything that he's asking, or they can't explain it to him in a way that's satisfactory, he can pull that $3+ billion out whenever he'd like.
Well, now that would be an interesting threat, wouldn't it? Because the stock shot up when he bought. Presumably, it would shoot down if he were to sell.
Yes, exactly. Again, a lot of people after that became public with his position, the stock did raise, I want to say, by another 20% or something. So, and I'm sure it continued to go up. I haven't been tracking, but the thing is like you said, that's a lot of money that's on the line for a company that has had a struggle with, getting consistent revenue and having healthy profit margins. I think they had a recorded loss last quarter because they had to settle a lawsuit that cost them a lot of money. So it's not exactly like Twitter's in the best health as a company. So they certainly need that investment money so that they can certainly, try to improve the product and become more viable. And like I said earlier on the show, that's why I hope that Elon is there not just to help deal with that problem, but also provide them with lanes of opportunity to actually make this platform sustainable and profitable and successful. Because right now it's there, but it's been struggling. And that's what's been frustrating for investors and why it has not been valued strongly since it IPO'd.
Fair enough. More calls in just a second here. 1-866-50-JIMBO, 1-866-505-4626 for James Czerniawski, Senior Policy Analyst at AmericansForProsperity.org. Back in a moment. Back to the Jim Bohannon Show at 1-866-50-JIMBO, 1-866-505-4626. Our guest is James Czerniawski, Senior Policy Analyst in Technology and Innovation at AmericansForProsperity.org. We're looking at the impact of Elon Musk's arrival at Twitter. And here is Kevin in Burlingame, California.
Hello, how are you?
We're well, thank you. Go right ahead.
Okay, good. So first of all, I'd like to point out the other guy made a mistake about the additional investment that Elon Musk put in to buy stock. That doesn't go to Twitter, so they can't do anything with it. But what I really want to
what do you mean it doesn't go? It doesn't go to Twitter. What do you mean? I mean he bought shares of stock.
He just bought stock. No, he bought shares of stock in the open market. Those shares have already been sold. Twitter doesn't get any additional money when Elon Musk buys stock in the stock market.
Then why really? Why would the stock price go up if Twitter wasn't getting the money?
Well, there's two issues. Twitter already sold the stock, right? So the stock's out there in the stock market at different pricing. And if you look at what Elon Musk has done, he's basically amplified a bunch of people that believe he can do something about the problem that they're having at Twitter, where TikTok is the new big thing, and Twitter makes money by selling ads. And my big issue here with Twitter is that I think they have a duty to be patriotic. And I think what they're doing now is just trying to sell ads so they get more engagement. And unfortunately, the popular things that gets engagement are not always truthful. And the truth is not always popular.
All right. Well, our guest has got about 40 seconds in which to respond. Go ahead. And by the way, if you're online, we will get to your call because our guest has agreed to stay into the next hour. Go ahead, James.
Yeah, again, I think that you're raising an interesting point, but at the end of the day, that 9.2% stake in the company does have implications for Twitter should Elon Musk choose to exercise selling those stock. He does face that kind of power there that the company does have to be cognizant of. As to whether or not they have a duty to be patriotic, I'm not really sure what that means. If we're talking about extolling American values, they certainly do that in numerous ways. I would point you to how they've been interacting with the Russia-Ukraine war, where they've taken lots of action to go and demonetize Russian content that's out there that would be promoting propaganda, etc. Yeah. So they're certainly trying to expose values of a free democracy.
All right. We're going to pause on that note. Stay on the line. We'll speak off air. James Czerniawski of AmericansForProsperity.org. This is Westwood One. Hi there, and good evening, and welcome to the Jim Bohannon Show from Westwood One Radio. We're at 1-866-50-JIMBO, 1-866-505-4626. Online, find us at JimBohannonShow.com. You can follow me on Twitter at Jimbo Talks as we continue our discussion with James Czerniawski, Senior Policy Analyst in Technology and Innovation at AmericansForProsperity.org. We're talking about the impact of Elon Musk's arrival at Twitter with 9.2% of the shares of stock there, and whether or not he will be able to keep on being the self-described free speech absolutist at an organization which seems dedicated in the opposite direction. Frank in Las Vegas calls in. Good evening, Frank.
Do you have me?
Yes, we do have you. Go right ahead. You're on the radio.
Jim, a fantastic guest. Twitter had the greatest sales. A businessman that came into the presidency with a net worth of $11 billion. A true businessman since the founding fathers or whoever you want to pick. And they cut him off. I mean, you had the greatest salesman for free, and then this genius, this boy wonder, who was diagnosed genius at 3, he comes in and buys. I'm sure you guys are aware of what he did with Bitcoin, and he didn't lose. I think as an American, he did what he did to say, try to cut me off. He speak his mind, and as you guys just confirmed, the majority shareholder.
Well, no, he's not a majority shareholder. He is a minority shareholder at 9.2%. So 90.8% of the shares do not belong to Elon Musk.
Oh, yeah, agreed. But he is the largest holding shareholder.
He is the largest shareholder. That is correct. He's not anywhere close to being a majority shareholder. But yes, go ahead.
Yeah, and I'm glad you clarified that for your audience. But the bottom line is if he wants to tweet, he's going to tweet. I want to hear what your guest has to say to my interjection to your show. Really good guess, Jim. Thank you.
Sure. All right. Thoughts, James Czerniawski? Were you clear on all of that?
I mean, it's an interesting theory as to why Elon bought shares in Twitter. I'm sure that it's probably not a bad thing to go and have some shares in the company if you're trying to avoid getting blocked or banned from the server. But it certainly is probably one reason of many that he had. But I think that ultimately he wanted to try to force Twitter to adhere to more free speech-oriented principles in terms of how they're approaching content moderation decisions that they have on their platform. Ultimately, at the end of the day, that's the biggest thing that he wants. And then hopefully as like a 1B, he wants to go and make money and help the company become successful. Because if it does, then it's another thing that we go and associate with Elon Musk, the wonder kid and the tech entrepreneur that everybody loves, the richest man in the world, right?
Well, I guess we love him. I mean, I certainly recognize his acumen for making money. Yeah. 1-866-50-JIMBO, 1-866-505-4626, and to Michael in San Francisco. Good evening.
Good evening. First-time caller, Mr. Czerniawski. Thank you, Mr. Bohannon. My thoughts are that today Bloomberg reported that Twitter made Elon Musk a board member that would limit his ownership up to 15%. Okay, and he would probably have to huddle with other large shareholders, probably institutional ownership, and to combine at least 51% of the stock to affect any kind of decision. And most of those other owners, they're only interested to make the stock go up. They just want to make money. Another aspect could be Elon could be you want to see the technical documents of Twitter, because there have been rumors that he wants to start his own platform, and maybe he's going to borrow a little bit of Twitter's technology to jumpstart his own effort. So that's about it. And then, of course, you can always get Dorsey fired if he's on the compensation committee. So,
all right,
let's hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, let's hear Mr. Czerniawski's thoughts about all of that. James?
Yeah, again, I think that you raise a good point. Again, even with him getting the board seat and it raising what his ownership stake in Twitter is, even at 15%, like there's still 85% of the company that's not owned by him. But again, it's about he is the largest individual shareholder that's there versus, however many other individual, shareholders that are out there that have significantly less share of the company as an individual holder. So with him being on the board, he'll go and do that. And like you said, other board members want to go and make money. And I'm sure that they're open to hearing ideas from Elon on how to do that. I'm sure that that's part of his thinking too. Maybe he wants to go and start his own thing and wants to learn from Twitter. I don't have any problem with that. I don't think Twitter necessarily even has a problem with that per se. But that's a little bit of a far off conversation right now. He's a board member on Twitter, and he should be there trying to help instill them with better free speech oriented content moderation decisions and hopefully make them be a successful company so that way they can actually be viable.
Is Michael correct that being a board member of Twitter limits you to 15% total shareholding?
I'm not necessarily an expert on securities law, so I don't know what the caps are with respect to that, but it wouldn't be, surprising if there was some sort of artificial cap in order to avoid like any kind of hostile takeover or something. I think that they do that from like a self-interest thing, but I'm not a securities law expert. I defer to the experts on how that works.
Twitter has reiterated this week that the board does not make policy decisions. I'll get into the follow-up to that here in a second. Who makes policy decisions if the corporate board of a company doesn't make those decisions? I mean, is that still in the hands of the founder, or how does that work? I mean, I thought that always decisions of a company were made by the board. That's why you have a board.
Well, the board typically is responsible for driving that mission and vision and helping guide the company in that big sense. But like a policy decision in terms of how the terms of service of Twitter actually, is lined out for the internet is not going to be something you'd expect your board member to do. They're not full-time employees. They have other things going on, right? Like Elon, he has SpaceX and Tesla going on. I don't think he'd want to sit around trying to think about what kinds of policies he'd want the platform to have, extensively at least. So typically with these content moderation decisions, you have what are called trust and safety teams usually within these organizations that go and look at different content moderation decisions. So this could be things that handle illegal content because they have to screen for that and deal with those kinds of issues. And then just in general, like how do they want to curate content on their platform so that they can have a community that represents, what they're trying to get. So it's usually done within the policy of the trust and safety teams, to my understanding.
Let's turn to Jason in Spokane, Washington now. Hello.
Hi. I was wondering if your guest had looked at Trump's Truth platform and what he thinks about that, and if he thinks that's a good way to force Twitter to, have free speech.
The alternative social media platform, for those not familiar with that. James?
Yeah, I actually am on Truth Social. You can follow me there if you want, at JamesCZ19, although I have not done many truths on that platform yet, to be honest. It's a pretty interesting thing. It's had a little bit of, I think, by public knowledge, it's had not an ideal rollout, so it's not exactly gone smooth. But, I'm always somebody that's a techno-optimist. I think that there's a bright future for Truth Social once they get past their technical issues and actually start, engaging on there a little bit more. And also notably right now, the former president actually isn't even using it. That might be for a couple of reasons, but once he starts using Truth Social, I imagine that'll go and drum up more activity and get more attention there and draw more eyes to the platform. So it remains to be seen how successful it'll be, but I'm hopeful. I think it's okay.
Why would he set something up like that, knowing that he's the big draw and not be using it immediately? I'm missing something here.
Yeah, so I can't speak for exactly why the president's doing it, but if I had to guess, if I was Donald Trump right now, the best thing that he actually has working for him is that he's not talking. And hear me out here. Because of the fact that he's not talking, everything shifts onto the current president, Joe Biden. And everything, all the problems that are out there right now that are facing Americans land squarely at the feet of Joe Biden. They can't scapegoat it on Donald Trump. And we've seen that that's given him a bump in his polling in a head-to-head matchup against Joe Biden and Kamala Harris in 2024. So if you're Donald Trump, I don't necessarily blame him for not wanting to use something to give Democrats ammunition should he want to run in 2024. That's just my theory, but I could be wrong. He could just not be interested.
1-866-50-JIMBO is our number, 1-866-505-4626. And back with more with James Czerniawski, Senior Policy Analyst in Technology and Innovation at AmericansForProsperity.org. We're looking at social media in general and Elon Musk's arrival at Twitter in particular. 1-866-50-JIMBO, 1-866-505-4626, and we'll be back on the Jim Bohannon Show in just a moment. Welcome back to the Jim Bohannon Show at 1-866-50-JIMBO, 1-866-505-4626 with our guest, James Czerniawski. He is with AmericansForProsperity.org, and we're looking at the potential impact of Elon Musk now that he is a member of the board and has a 9.2% shareholding in the company Twitter. Now then, I understand that there have been Twitter employees, 4 of them spoke with the Reuters news service and said they were concerned about Musk's ability to influence company policies on what they describe as abusive users and harmful content. Obviously, these are people who wish to be the ones who determine just precisely what is an abusive user and what is harmful content. Your thoughts, James?
Yeah, I saw that story too. I find it interesting. It's not necessarily surprising. Elon is he's a very dynamic personality, to put it lightly. So I'm pretty sure that when he made that decision to go and buy the shares in Twitter the way that he did, in the fashion that he did, that there were definitely some cages that were rattled at Twitter because they don't know what to expect with this guy because they've never worked with him. They don't know. They only see how he interacts on the platform where he is Elon. So I don't necessarily blame them for having some concerns. But again, at the end of the day, like you mentioned, whether it's at 9.2% or with the board seat to 15% that was mentioned prior, the ability or the likelihood is not necessarily 100% or anything close to it that this kind of action results in policy changes for Twitter, more broadly speaking. They're going to be doing what they're doing, and Elon's going to just offer his thoughts as a member of the board. So that's where I see that right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I note that the employees from Twitter told Reuters that Musk's view on moderation could weaken years-long efforts to make Twitter a place of healthy discourse and might allow trolling and mob attacks to flourish, which I guess is their automatic definition of anything other than following the agenda that they have adopted. If you're not woke enough, then automatically you're trolling or engaging in mob attacks. I mean, those people really have no place in this country as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I mean, again, so I guess to be a little bit more fair to those employees that do that, yes, maybe they certainly have a bend towards, what they view as mob attack or whatever. But to their credit, when Trump was president, he had a lot of people giving him death threats all the time. And when that was happening, especially like when he had COVID, I know Twitter did a lot to go and suspend and take action and delete the commentary that from people that were wishing death on him and trying to put threats against his life. And this has happened with AOC too, and plenty of lawmakers. So they certainly try to address that kind of content more broadly, which is just unsavory. I don't think we want to see people issuing death threats to each other on the internet. Like, it's not good conduct. I don't think we'd want to see that per se.
No, we do not want to see that.
That's what they have in mind.
But of course, it's not just death threats that have been banned.
Yeah, no, of course not. There's been a whole variety of reasons. Notably, why Elon did the purchase of the shares was because of the Babylon Bee getting their account suspended because they misgendered the human health and the human health services secretary over there. And honestly, I don't know how big of a deal that was in the sense that I'm not even sure if that person was aware. So the harm, I'm not really sure is as legitimate. That might be overstated. I don't know. They're making the choice that they're making, and it looks bad sometimes, especially when you know that the Bee is a parody site. So there's definitely better things that can be done. And again, we don't know for sure if Elon's going to be able to translate his board seat status into changing effective policy at the company. So I don't know. We'll have to see.
In the wake of the Donald Trump ban from Facebook and Twitter, by the way, Musk had tweeted that many people would be unhappy with U.S. tech companies acting as the de facto arbiter of free speech. Well, that's an understatement. They're absolutely unhappy. And again, as you say, not everything they've done has been egregious, but some of it has. And in the hands of employees at a private company, I'm not sure what the rest of us even do about that other than explore alternative platforms like this Truth or Parler or what have you. Are there viable alternatives out there?
Yeah, again, I'm a big advocate for conservatives just leveraging multiple platforms and knowing what voice they should be using in that respective space. Twitter is not necessarily, in terms of its user base, conservative friendly, to say the least. The bulk majority of them are sub 35, highly educated, and living in urban areas, which means that those typically, according to studies, would indicate that they're more Democrat-leaning than Republican-leaning. So that's just something that conservatives need to keep in the back of their head when they're engaging in that space. So that's why you can go and build out communities in Discord and other tech platforms like Twitch. You can sit there and also leverage the existing media structure that's out there. You have local Fox affiliates that you can work with if you're a conservative. You have your local papers that will go and let you write op-eds, etc. So there are options that are out there. It's not just Twitter. I think that we put too much stock in the ability of these platforms to connect them with constituents, when in reality, it's because of the global nature of the platform. There's not necessarily any kind of direct correlation between a politician being on Twitter, their number of followers, and how many of their followers are constituents, and whether or not they would be able to reach them without that platform. It certainly helps them to a margin, but again, I think that they're overemphasizing on Twitter when there's a lot of options out there for them where they can perform great and also showcase other sides of them. Like the bad thing about Twitter is that with its increasingly bad set of incentives to be conflicting with one another, it's just like that's all we get all the time is a bunch of fights, sometimes in the political arena. That's not necessarily fun. But, you go on some of these other platforms, you can go and showcase yourself in a different light, right? So like Senator Markey was on TikTok, I think a couple of weeks ago, dancing to Sunshine, one of those older songs. And it was definitely funny, but that's something you normally see a senator do.
Yeah. We do have some calls. We'll have one more segment with James Czerniawski of AmericansForProsperity.org. So we'll take your calls when we come back on The Bohannon Show in a moment. Welcome back to the Jim Bohannon Show with our guest James Czerniawski, Senior Policy Analyst in Technology and Innovation at AmericansForProsperity.org. We're talking about the presence of Elon Musk at Twitter. We have a call from Elon. No, I'm sure it is not the same one. In Reading, Pennsylvania. Good evening, Elon in Reading.
Good evening. No relation to the Elon Musk. I'm just the discount local space nerd in Reading, Pennsylvania.
All right.
I had some comments about Elon Musk, where, of course, his company SpaceX is participating in the commercial space race. Of course, we all know the old space race. This new one is where his company is competing for a lot of these contracts, not where only countries compete, but also companies, SpaceX. So in his endeavor with all of these technological feats, he's also had a large stake in American politics. And what happens is it gets divisive with these different modes of communication platforms like Twitter. Of course, we've all heard about his stake in Twitter, but it ultimately comes down to, can he perform on these platforms? Can he push things towards his will in the capitalist market that we have? He also has Tesla. He has, of course, SpaceX, also Solar City, and a few other ventures that he's a part of. Neuralink, who integrates threads into brains where it's much more finely tuned than the current brain implants that are available right now. These are noble endeavors, but ultimately, and we've all heard it, Elon Musk is not a perfect character. He's a person who has made many flaws in his life. And, over these long spans of his entrepreneurship, where he has, had many ventures, but has also fallen short. What I would like to see out of him, of course, is not only his deals with the Artemis Accords to land on the moon, but right now NASA is giving hundreds of millions or billions of dollars of taxpayer money to these programs to bring people to the moon. Now, if you're in the U.S. right now, you see the crescent moon, hopefully, if you don't have any clouds, you see the crescent moon on your horizon. Well, one of the companies to bring people back to the surface of the moon is SpaceX. And so in this endeavor, in the human landing system in the Artemis Accords, he has signed up with these systems. Now, the FAA has stopped him from completing this testing of this new rocket he has. They're testing down in Boca Chica, Texas, one of those southernmost points in the U.S. in Texas on the Gulf of Mexico. Now, the FAA has restricted this. Of course, there are environmental concerns, but there are also concerns in his company's ability to complete this mission. Now, whether we can see this happen as a private commercial company is a grand question, but no other company is really taking this on. There are a few other competitors. We've heard about Jeff Bezos and his company, but he hasn't put anything in the main sphere of competition in the American market as far as space travel, with the New Glenn rocket, which is years overdue, billions overdone, and the rocket, the BE-4 engine that he has promised to other American companies, these heritage companies, Aerojet Rocketdyne, Orbital ATK, all part of now Jeff Bezos' Blue Origin.
All right. Very good. Thank you very much for being on, James. We do appreciate it.
Of course.
James Czerniawski from AmericansForProsperity.org.